Okay, so let's just unpack this. It is February 2026. And if you imagine looking out the window of the Binnenhof in The Hague right now, it's probably raining, the sky is gray, and if you look at the political landscape, it feels like the ground is literally shifting beneath your feet.
Yeah, it's a very specific, very volatile moment in time. We're looking at a world that feels incredibly fragile. And to understand why, we're going to do a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of materials today.
Right.
It's all centered around a broadcast of Lighthouse TV, specifically episode 73, which aired on Wednesday, February 18th, 2026.
And the mission today for this deep dive is to connect some dots that, at first glance, really don't look like they belong on the same page. I'm going to try and figure out how a completely comical, almost slapstick failure to name a new political party in the Netherlands is directly connected to
the United States basically waving goodbye to Europe.
Exactly. Waving goodbye in Munich. And then some truly terrifying rumors about Dutch fighter pilots engaging in dogfights over Ukraine.
It sounds like we are building a conspiracy theory board with red string, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
But when you really analyze this Lighthouse TV episode, the connecting thread is glaringly obvious. It's fragmentation. It's the erosion of the structures we rely on.
The bedrock is cracking.
Right. We are seeing the political parties fracture. We are seeing the trust between the voter and the state dissolve. And we're seeing the global security alliances that have held the world together for 80 years just kind of fall apart.
Before we get into the heavy geopolitical stuff, though, and trust me, it gets very heavy, we need to set the stage for you. We need to know who we are listening to in this source.
Yeah, that's important.
Because Lighthouse TV isn't exactly the 8 o'clock news on the NNS, is it?
No, it's not. And that is crucial context for you as we go through this. Lighthouse TV positions itself as highly critical media. They were extremely skeptical of the establishment, parties like the VVD and D66.
Right.
They are skeptical of the EU. The whole tone of the source material is very much, the mainstream is lying to you, and we are going to look at what's really happening.
So who exactly is on the panel for this episode?
It is a really interesting mix of insiders and agitators. You have Gidi Markuszower.
The man of the hour.
Exactly. A member of parliament who is currently standing in the rubble of a very messy political divorce from Geert Wilders' PVV party.
Yeah.
Then you have Joe Berlin. He's a campaign strategist who looks at the data and sees the anger on the ground. You have Sander Sasson, a drone and defense expert. He's the technical brain who brings the military reality into the room. And finally, David Boerstra, a journalist for Lighthouse TV.
Okay, let's start with the domestic mess. Because if you have been following Dutch politics in this timeline, the PVV winning 37 seats in the previous election felt like a seismic event.
It was huge.
That was a landslide.
Yeah.
But here we are in February 2026, and the victory party seems to be entirely over.
The hangover has definitely set in. Markuszower's departure is the headline here. He didn't just leave the party. He took 6 other MPs with him.
Wow.
Now, in a parliamentary system, that is a massive bleed. That changes the math of the entire legislature. But what I found fascinating in this deep dive wasn't just the fact that he split, it was the mechanics of the punishment he faced for doing it.
The penalty. I actually highlighted this in the notes because it felt so petty, yet so bureaucratic.
It is the absolute weaponization of procedure. Markuszower talks about this with a lot of frustration in the source. See, in the Dutch parliament, your influence isn't just about your voice, it's about the clock.
The literal time you have.
Right. Your speaking time is mathematically tied to your faction size and your status.
So it's a marketplace of minutes.
Precisely. And because he split, he has been docked. He mentions the upcoming government statement debate. Now, this is the debate. It's the Super Bowl of parliamentary arguing.
Everyone watches it.
And he has been restricted to exactly 11 and a half minutes.
11 and a half. Not 12. Not 15. 11 and a half.
He actually ran the numbers on air. He says it's a 25% reduction compared to what he would have had if he had just stayed in line. He literally calls it a fine for disloyalty. The system is designed to penalize fragmentation. If you break away, we will basically mute your microphone.
But the punishment isn't just about time, is it? It's about labor. He talks about the shift in his daily life, and it sounded utterly exhausting.
It's a total reset of his reality. He describes his old life in the PVV as being the engine room for Geert Wilders. He says he would spend 8 or 9 hours a day just prepping Wilders for debates.
Wow.
He was the brain, Wilders was the voice. He was doing the reading, the strategy, the writing.
Yeah, now.
Now he has to be the engine in the car. He's writing the lines, he's doing the research, and he is the one standing at the podium. There is no massive team behind him anymore. It's a fascinating look at the logistical cost of starting over in politics.
Speaking of starting over, we really have to talk about the branding. Because for a guy who knows the political system so well, the rollout of this new faction was, well, let's just call it amateur hour.
Oh, the naming controversy. This plays out like a scripted comedy sketch in the source material.
It really does. So just imagine the scene. They've split from the PVV. They need a name that sounds strong, patriotic, serious, and they settle on NVA.
Netherlands Vrijheidsalliantie, the Dutch Freedom Alliance.
It checks all the boxes, right? Freedom, check. Alliance, check. Dutch, check. It sounds like a total winner.
Except for one small problem. They apparently forgot to check if anyone else was using it, and they ran headfirst into two very different, very stubborn brick walls.
Let's start with the international incident, the Belgians.
Yes. Specifically, the NVA in Belgium. Now, for any of you who don't follow Belgian politics, the NVA, there isn't some small knitting circle. It is a massive political machine. It's the party of Bart de Wever, the mayor of Antwerp, and arguably the most powerful politician in Belgium.
And they were not flattered by the invitation.
Not at all. Markuszower mentions receiving a letter or a message from de Wever's office, and the tone was effectively, "Please stop, that is our name."
And Markuszower's defense in the source material is hilarious to me. He is basically arguing semantics with a foreign leader. He says, but Bart, your V stands for Vlaams, Flemish. Our V stands for Vrijheid, freedom. It's totally different. Also, you guys use a hyphen.
Which is a bold defense, but it didn't hold up.
Yeah.
But the real final blow came from inside the Netherlands. There is another group that uses the exact abbreviation NVA.
The Autism Association.
The Nederlands Vereniging voor Autism.
I couldn't make this up if I tried. So you have the Belgian separatists on one line and the Autism Association on the other, both issuing cease and desist orders.
It really highlights just how crowded the political and social space has become. Every acronym is taken. It's funny, but it is also telling. You have these MPs who want to run the country, who talk about sovereignty and grand strategy, but they can't clear the trademark on their own name before launching.
It signals chaos. It signals that they are just making this up as they go along. But Markuszower actually admits that this chaos has a root cause. He is very candid about why the PVV, and by extension the entire right-wing movement, is fracturing.
This is the analysis that really matters. He says they failed to deliver. They got the 37 seats. That is a massive mandate in a fragmented Dutch landscape. But the voters look at their lives and nothing has changed. He looks at the polls now and the PVV has dropped to 26 seats.
And he interprets that drop as purely disappointment. The voters wanted a revolution and they got a coalition agreement.
Exactly. He calls the current cabinet, which, remember, includes his former party, old politics, which is deeply ironic, considering the PVV was supposed to be the antidote to old politics.
That's the trap of populism, isn't it? Once you are in power, you are the establishment. But Markuszower specifically points his finger at the VVD, the liberals. He has this really sharp observation about how the VVD operates. He says the VVD loses elections, their seat count drops year after year, but they always win the formation.
It's a cynical but highly accurate observation of Dutch coalition building. He points out that despite losing seats, the VVD secured the ministries of finance and defense.
The power ministries.
Precisely. Markuszower argues that if you control the money and you control the military, you control the trajectory of the nation. It doesn't matter if you have 10 seats or 30. If you hold the purse strings, you win. He actually groups the VVD, D66, and CDA together as ideological brothers and sisters.
He calls them a bloc. He says they might squabble on TV during campaign season, but when it comes to the big stuff, climate, migration, the EU, they are a unified front protecting the status quo.
And Markuszower was supposed to be the guy breaking that status quo. He was in line for a ministry. He was going to be the wrench in the gears. And this is where the story shifts from a political comedy about names to a spy thriller. We have to talk about the AIVD.
The General Intelligence and Security Service. This is the dark heart of the episode. Markuszower was vetoed, not by the voters, not by the other parties, but by the AIVD.
And this is crucial to understand. It wasn't because of a trial. It wasn't a public charge. Markuszower keeps emphasizing this metaphor of the drawer.
The drawer. Explain that to me, because it sounds incredibly lazy for a top-tier intelligence agency.
That is exactly his point. He claims the AIVD didn't conduct a full, new investigation into his current conduct. They simply opened a drawer, found an old file from years ago, dusted it off, and said no.
This is what the panel calls Kafkaesque. And for you listening, we throw that word around a lot in media, but here it really fits the definition perfectly. It describes a bureaucratic nightmare where you are accused of a crime, but the authorities won't tell you what the crime is, so you can't defend yourself.
That is the literal reality he describes. He doesn't know what is in the file. Geert Wilders doesn't know. The formateur, the person tasked with building the government, doesn't know. Even the judge who reviews the decision gets a heavily redacted version. It's a black box.
So he is just sitting there, guessing.
He has to speculate. He thinks it might go back to 2010. Maybe it was a letter he wrote to former Minister Hirschballen. Or the rumor that always seems to follow him, ties to a foreign intelligence service.
The Mossad whisper.
The panel jokes about it, saying, oh, is it the Mossad? But the implication is very serious, acting for a foreign power. However, Markuszower makes a very logical defense in this interview. He says, look at my record. I have been in Parliament for a decade. I sit on sensitive committees, I have passed judicial checks, and I have a permit for weapon possession.
Which I honestly didn't realize was a thing for Dutch MPs. Do they all carry guns?
Not all of them know. But Geert Wilders and those in his inner circle have lived under extreme threat levels for years. The screening to get a weapon permit in the Netherlands is extremely rigorous. It's not like walking into a Walmart. You are vetted deeply.
So his argument is, if I am safe enough to carry a loaded gun and vote on national laws for 10 years, how can I suddenly be a national security threat the exact moment I try to become a minister?
It exposes what the source calls a democratic deficit. Who is really in charge of the country? Is it the elected MP that the people voted for? Or is it an unelected analyst in a basement in Zoetermeer who can just pull a file out of a drawer and say, checkmate?
It feeds that narrative of the deep state, a term I know a lot of critics hate. But in this specific context, it fits the description perfectly. The idea that there is a permanent layer of bureaucracy that manages outcomes regardless of who actually wins the election.
And that feeling of managed outcomes, of the game being fundamentally rigged, is destroying trust at the local level too. Because while Markuszower is fighting the spooks in The Hague, the D66 party is fighting a scandal that is just, honestly, it's cringe-inducing.
Nelly Van Berkel.
Right. Let's set the scene for this one. D66 needed a state secretary. They were frantic. They picked Van Berkel. She was an MP. She looked the part. But then the press did a little digging and found out she outright lied on her CV. She claimed she had a master's degree from Leiden University.
And she didn't.
She never obtained it. Now, lying on a resume is bad. It's fraud. But the explanation, the spin that came out afterwards, that was insulting to everyone's intelligence.
This is what made me angry just reading it.
Yeah.
Journalist Elodie Verwij reported that the D66 defense circulating in The Hague was that Van Berkel had a traumatic youth, and this trauma caused memory blackouts.
So the argument was she genuinely thought she had the degree. She had effectively hallucinated her own graduation because she had forgotten that she failed or dropped out.
I mean, look, trauma is real. Mental health is real. But you don't forget that you didn't write a master's thesis. You don't forget that you never wore the cap and gown.
The panel wasn't buying it either. They called it total nonsense. They saw it as the elite protecting their own with buzzwords. Trauma. Safe space. But it connects to what Joe Berlin, the strategist, is seeing on the ground. He's out there campaigning in Medemblik for the municipal elections.
And what is he seeing from the voters?
He says people are literally throwing their voting passes in the trash. He watches them do it.
Because why bother?
Exactly. If the politicians lie about their degrees and use trauma as a shield when they get caught, and dismiss campaign promises as metaphors, we have to mention Rob Jetton again here.
The metaphor man.
Rob Jetton, the leader of D66, famously dismissed his election promise to build 10 new cities as just a metaphor for hope. When you tell voters that your concrete promises were just poetry, you break the social contract entirely.
And the result is complete apathy. Berlin says the voters tell him they do what they want in The Hague anyway, and the place where doing what they want hurts the most right now is migration. This brings us to the Lockham story, the safety grant.
This is a devastating example of policy failure. The municipality of Lockham is getting a new asylum center, an AZC. The locals are naturally worried about safety, so what does the municipality do? They allegedly offered residents €1,000 each for security measures.
Here's $1,000. Go buy a Ring doorbell and a better lock. Good luck.
Think about the signal that sends. The panel argues that this is an admission of guilt by the state. The government is effectively saying, we are putting a facility here. We know it will increase the risk to your safety. We cannot stop it. We cannot police it. So here is some cash to fortify your home.
It's a surrender. It is the state giving up on its primary duty, which is protection.
It shifts the burden of safety from the police directly to the citizen. And the fear isn't abstract for these people. The panel brings up the murder of a woman named Lisa.
This is a really tragic case, and we need to handle it with respect, but we also need to impartially retort what the source is saying about it. Lisa was allegedly killed by an asylum seeker who was here illegally.
And who had a prior record of sexual violence. But the Lighthouse panel focuses heavily on the aftermath. They focus on the accusation of a cover-up. They claim the authorities in Amsterdam purposefully withheld the suspect's description, the signalment, before the murder occurred.
Why would they do that?
The allegation from the panel is that they wanted to avoid stigmatizing the group. They didn't want to release a description that might inflame anti-migrant sentiment in the city.
So the charge is that political correctness potentially cost a woman her life.
That is the explicit charge. They argue that if the public had been warned about a dangerous man matching that description, the outcome might have been different. It's a very heavy accusation, but it reflects the deep, deep distrust the panel feels toward the authorities right now.
And when you combine that fear for physical safety with the economic cost, the episode cites Jan van de Beek claiming migration costs the state 46 billion euros a year. You get a population that feels broke, unsafe, and completely ignored.
It paints a very bleak picture of the domestic situation. The Netherlands is cracking from the inside. But as we move to the second half of this deep dive, we have to look outside. Because while the Dutch are arguing about party names and fake CVs, the global order is actually collapsing. We need to go to Munich.
The Munich Security Conference, the Davos of defense. This is where the world's leaders go to discuss war and peace. And in February 2026, the vibe was, well, grim doesn't even begin to cover it.
It was a massive wake-up call for Europe. The source contrasts two speeches, one from J.D. Vance in 2025 and one from Marco Rubio in 2026.
J.D. Vance, the vice president. In 2025, he apparently gave a speech that was described as a literal slap in the face to Europe. He's blunt, aggressive, basically telling Europe to pay up.
And in 2026, Marco Rubio is representing the U.S. administration. And his tone was very different. He was softer, he was diplomatic, he was shaking hands.
But the panel says the actual message was exactly the same.
The packaging changed, but the product is identical. Rubio laid out what the panel calls the new pecking order. He made it crystal clear where Europe currently stands in America's priorities.
Let's break down that list for the listener.
Priority number 1, the Western Hemisphere, the Americas. Why? Because that is the physical border. That involves drugs, migration, the immediate security of the U.S. homeland. Priority number 2, the Indo-Pacific. China. That is the existential, economic, and military rival.
And Europe.
Priority number 3, the bronze medal. And in geopolitics, the bronze medal means you are basically on your own. The U.S. is pivoting. They are looking west to Asia and south to the Americas. They are turning their back on the Atlantic.
That has to be absolutely terrifying for European leaders who have relied on the American security umbrella for 80 years.
It is, and it's leading to a very public cultural lashout. There was this fascinating clash between Rubio and Friedrich Merz from Germany. Merz tried to lecture Rubio about the Magyar movement. He claimed that the U.S. right wing doesn't align with European values. He tried to frame it as a culture war.
And Rubio's response was cutting. This really struck me in the source. Rubio argued that Americans fight for nation, people, and a way of life. He implied that Europe fights for what?
Abstracts, bureaucracy, international law, climate accords, universal human rights. Rubio is asking a very uncomfortable question. Who dies for a trade agreement? Who picks up a rifle to defend the concept of multilateralism?
Markuszower picks up on this in the discussion. He agrees with Rubio completely. He argues that Europe has de-Christianized. He says we have lost the shared values, God, family, nation, that actually make people willing to sacrifice. We've become a continent of managers, not believers.
And he argues that if you don't know what you stand for, you just can't fight. And that weakness is being actively exploited.
Yeah.
Zelensky was at the conference too. And the panel describes a very sinister realization that hit the Ukrainian delegation.
The proxy war theory.
Yes. The panel suggests that Zelensky finally realized that the Western aid was never designed to help Ukraine win.
It was a drip feed.
It was carefully calibrated. Just enough to keep Ukraine in the fight. Just enough to bleed the Russian military. But never quite enough to actually secure a decisive victory. Because cynically speaking, a quick Ukrainian victory doesn't destroy the Russian military machine as effectively as a 5-year meat grinder.
It is cynical beyond belief. It means we, the West, bought American strategic time with Ukrainian lives.
That is the panel's take. They view it as a deliberate strategy to delay the decline of American hegemony. But now, as the U.S. pivots to China, that support is drying up fast. Europe is left holding the bag. We have a war on our border, a potential refugee crisis of millions, and no plan. And in that desperation, in that total vacuum of leadership, we start seeing rumors that are frankly terrifying.
We have to talk about the F-16s.
Yeah.
And more importantly, the pilots.
This is the absolute bombshell of the episode, the most explosive claim they make. There is a report from a French intelligence outlet called Intelligence Online. They claim that Dutch F-16 pilots are currently active in the skies over Ukraine.
Now, hold on. We have to be super clear here for the listeners. The official stance is no.
Correct. Total denial across the board. The Dutch Ministry of Defense says no. Vokal Air Base says no. The Ukrainian government says no.
But the rumor persists anyway. And Sander Sasson, the defense expert, breaks down why it persists. It essentially comes down to the math of training.
Exactly. Sasson explains that standard F-16 training takes about 4 years to produce a combat-ready pilot. The accelerated war course for the Ukrainians is 6 months.
4 years versus 6 months.
Sasson argues that in 6 months, you can learn to fly the plane. You can take off and land without crashing. But can you learn to survive in an airspace completely saturated with Russian S-400 missile systems? Can you master the complex radar battles? Can you dogfight?
His argument is that it's just impossible.
He implies that if you put a 6-month rookie in that cockpit, they're just a flying target. So if these jets are actually being effective out there, the suspicion arises, who is flying them?
The Top Gun Maverick scenario.
The old veterans, yeah. The rumor is that retired pilots, perhaps working as private contractors, are sitting in those cockpits. But Sasson offers a more technical nuance that I found really fascinating. He suggests they might not be engaging in traditional dogfights at all.
The paint and shoot tactic.
Yes, he suggests a hybrid role. What if Western pilots fly the jets along the border or in relatively safe zones? They use the F-16's advanced radar pods to paint Russian targets, basically locking onto them with data.
So they find the enemy.
They find the enemy. Then they use a secure data link, like Link 16, to send that targeting info to a Ukrainian pilot or a ground battery. The Dutch pilot is the eyes, the Ukrainian is the trigger finger.
That feels like a massive loophole. I didn't shoot him, I just pointed a laser at his head.
It is a massive gray area. Technically, the Dutch pilot isn't engaging the enemy, but functionally, they are an essential part of the kill chain, and Sasson warns that the Russians simply won't care about the technicality. If a Dutch pilot guides a missile that kills Russian troops, that is an act of war.
And the journalist, David Borstra, points out that we have been boiling this frog for years.
The desensitization is real. Think about the trajectory here. 2 years ago, we said only helmets and vests. Then it was only defensive weapons. Then tanks. Then the F-16s themselves. Now we are talking about actual pilots.
The red lines just keep moving.
Every time we cross a line, we say, this is the last one, and then 6 months later, we cross the next one. We are creeping toward direct conflict, step by step, rumor by rumor.
So let's try to summarize this picture for you. We have a government in The Hague that is paralyzed by infighting and distrust. We have a population that feels unsafe in their own neighborhoods and feels like their vote doesn't matter. And we have a geopolitical shield, the USA, that is being lowered just as the storm hits.
And we might be stumbling into a world war because we can't say no to the next step on the escalation ladder. It's a very sobering picture of where we are.
The guest ended with a prediction. A simple one, but it really sticks with you. He said, the world will look very different next year.
It is hard to argue with that. The momentum of these events, the PVV split, the U.S. pivot, the war in Ukraine, it's all accelerating. The world of 2027 will not look like the world of 2026. The question is, will it look different because we fixed these cracks or because the whole thing finally shattered?
And that brings us right back to the question Marco Rubio posed. It's the question we have to leave you with today. If Europe is just a collection of abstracts, if we are just bureaucracy and broken promises, who is going to fight to save us?
That is the question. If we don't know who we are, we can't defend ourselves, and right now it looks like nobody else is coming to the rescue.
Heavy stuff. But that is why we do the deep dive, to get past the headlines and understand the currents underneath. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.